I knew something was off when I saw fresh footprints in the mud behind my shed, and I live alone. That part of my backyard is fenced off, locked, and mostly untouched. So when I spotted the crushed sprinkler heads, snapped garden stakes, and muddy boot prints leading to the broken gate latch, I did what any sane man would do. I checked my security cameras. That's when I saw them. 3 members of the HOA board climbing over my backyard fence like clumsy raccoons. Leading the charge, Karen herself, Darlene Whitmore. Every HOA has one. Short, tightly permed hair, oversized sunglasses, a clipboard like it's a weapon. She's the president, of course. Don't worry, Darlene barked on the footage, waving her clipboard like it was a search warrant. He's not home. We have every right to inspect this yard for unauthorized modifications. Spoiler, they didn't. I'm Xander Dole. I'm a paramedic, I work long shifts, and I mind my own business. I built a small wooden deck out back last spring, nothing fancy, fully permitted, even got it inspected. But Darlene and her little minions, Bob and Cynthia, had it out for me ever since I skipped their mandatory community planting day. Apparently, planting marigolds in front of the clubhouse is some kind of sacred act. Now they were in my yard, stomping through my garden like toddlers, snapping my tomato cages and knocking over a storage bin while taking photos and muttering. I told you he was hiding something, Cynthia huffed. That deck looks too new. Bet he didn't file the forms. I'll fine him into next week, Darlene declared, pointing her pen like it was an execution order. They left after 15 minutes, but the damage was done. I walked out back after seeing the footage and stood there boiling. They'd broken the lock on my gate, trampled my basil, and cracked a solar light. That deck, not even touched. They just wanted to play neighborhood sheriff. I printed the footage, pulled out the permits, and started writing everything down. The next day, I walked into the HOA office during their weekly meeting with a calm smile and a manila folder under my arm. Darlene, I said, interrupting her mid-sentence about someone's lawn clippings. You and your board trespassed on my property yesterday. Excuse me, she blinked, looking around like I'd accused her of murder. You heard me, I said, placing the printed images on the table. Here's footage of you breaking and entering. And here, I dropped another paper in front of her, are the permits for the deck you were so eager to fine me over. Bob swallowed hard. Cynthia went pale. Darlene, of course, doubled down. You can't record us without permission, I laughed. You were on my property without mine. That's illegal, Darlene, and you caused damage. This, I tapped the photos, is going to court. I turned and walked out before she could sputter out another excuse. They thought they'd scare me into submission. What they didn't know was that I'd already filed the police report. And I wasn't even close to finished. I didn't waste time after leaving that meeting. I drove straight from the HOA office to the precinct and handed over everything, copies of the footage, stills with timestamps, the property survey, and the list of damages. The officer at the desk, Sergeant Patel, raised an eyebrow when I told him who the trespassers were. HOA board members, he asked, flipping through the photos. That's a new one. They broke the gate lock to get in, tore up part of my garden. And they were taking photos like they were building a case. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. We've had complaints about that board before. Nothing stuck until now. You've got timestamps, footage, and documented damage. That's enough for criminal trespass and property damage. Want to press charges? I nodded once. He handed me a form and began typing up the incident report. I didn't even feel satisfaction. Just focus. People always assume you're just supposed to roll over when someone in a polo shirt with a clipboard says they're in charge. I've seen enough in the back of an ambulance to know that power doesn't always mean authority. Later that day, I got a call from Officer Martinez, the detective assigned to the case. She asked if I could meet her at my place to walk through the damage. I agreed, and by early evening we were standing in the backyard. She pointed to the snapped sprinkler head near the fence. They stepped on this, right after climbing over. You can see it clearly in the footage. She crouched, took a few photos, then moved to the shed's latch. This lock was cut, bolt cutters or something like it. I found it hanging by one hinge, she nodded, scribbling in her notebook. We'll need statements from you, and I'll probably need to pull statements from them too. If they admit to entering without notice or permission, that'll help. They didn't just enter, I said. They accused me of building illegally but never asked a question, didn't leave a note, just stomped around and left destruction behind. She met my eyes and gave a measured nod. This isn't a civil issue anymore. If they damaged property and entered without consent, they're not shielded by their HOA status. The next morning, the board received calls from the police. They were asked to come in and answer questions. That same afternoon, I started hearing whispers from neighbors. Apparently, Darlene had shown up at Cindy Packer's porch looking rattled, ranting about being harassed by the city and how someone was sabotaging the HOA. Then came the emergency board meeting. It was held in the community room with all the board members present plus about 30 residents who'd caught wind something was brewing. I showed up, took a seat in the second row, and waited. Darlene stood at the front, flanked by Bob and Cynthia, her voice tight. There have been some accusations made against this board. I want to make it very clear that everything we do is in accordance with the community bylaws. You climbed into someone's backyard, a voice called from the back. It was Mr. Havorson, a retired chemistry teacher who always wore socks with sandals. That's not a bylaw, that's breaking and entering. Murmurs swept the room. Darlene stiffened. We were conducting a compliance check. We had reasonable suspicion that you had no right, I said, standing. You didn't notify me, you didn't request access, and you caused damage. I have it all documented. Bob began to say something, but I raised a hand. This isn't just about me, it's about the way this board treats people. You fine folks for paint shades and mailbox heights, but you don't even follow your own procedures. You think the rules don't apply to you. Gasps and nods rippled through the room. Cynthia tried to redirect. This is not the appropriate forum for— No, this is exactly the forum, I said, stepping forward, because I've filed charges. The police are involved. And I've also submitted a formal petition to the city to review this HOA for abuse of power under Municipal Code 14-3. There's precedent. And if enough of us sign on, the city can intervene. Darlene's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then a voice from the crowd. Where do we sign? That was Miriam, who lived 2 doors down from me. She stood up, holding out her phone. You've got that petition set up, I nodded. Online and printed copies. I'll pass them around. One by one, residents came forward, some muttering about old fines, others about the board's refusal to hold open votes. By the end of the meeting, I had over 20 signatures, enough to trigger a city review. 2 days later, Officer Martinez called again. We've finished the initial investigation. All 3 admitted to entering your property. They claimed they had verbal authority but couldn't provide anything that backed it up. The city attorney is reviewing whether to press criminal charges. At minimum, it's going to civil court. Good, I said. And one more thing, we found evidence your gate lock was cut with bolt cutters. That escalates it to property destruction. I thanked her and hung up. The next week, the city sent a representative to audit the HOA's recent enforcement actions. Turns out, Darlene had been issuing fines without board votes. Several violations were never even brought to the rest of the board. She'd also authorized entry onto 2 other properties in the last 6 months, both without consent. One couple had moved out shortly after. When confronted, Bob tried to distance himself. I didn't know she went that far, he told the city rep. I thought we were just inspecting from the sidewalk. Cynthia claimed she was misled, but the audit didn't care. The board was cited for over a dozen violations of local housing governance law. The city froze their enforcement authority pending a full hearing. Even better, the court date for the trespass charge was set. I was ready to walk in with everything: the footage, printed statements, repair estimates, and the city's audit findings. Darlene tried calling me 2 days before the hearing. I let it go to voicemail. She offered to make things right if I dropped the charges. That told me everything I needed to know. On the day of the hearing, I arrived in a button-down shirt, folder in hand. Darlene walked in 10 minutes late, looking like she hadn't slept. Bob sat behind her, glancing around like a trapped animal. The judge listened patiently as I laid everything out, then turned to them. "You entered this man's property without notice or consent, caused damage and misrepresented your authority," he asked. Darlene tried to argue that the HOA had broad rights to enforce the CC and Articus. He raised a hand. "HOA authority does not override the law. You are not law enforcement. You are not exempt from trespass statutes." By the end, Darlene was ordered to pay full restitution for the damage, and the court issued a permanent injunction barring her or any board member from entering private property without written consent. But the real win came a week later when the city mailed out ballots to all homeowners for a special election to dissolve and reconstitute the board under oversight. I didn't run for anything, but I did host a barbecue the next weekend. Attendance was twice what it had ever been at a board meeting, and Darlene's house, lights off, curtains drawn. Funny how power disappears when it's dragged into daylight. The week after the court hearing, things changed fast. Darlene resigned, or rather, vanished without a formal statement. Her house sat dark most evenings, her front yard slowly going unkempt, as if the universe had finally decided to return the favor. Bob followed suit within days, citing health reasons. Cynthia tried to stick it out, but with the city audit still underway and new board elections scheduled, she was met with closed doors and cold greetings everywhere she went. Meanwhile, the city's temporary oversight panel began reviewing all prior HOA enforcement actions from the past 2 years. One neighbor, Mrs. Redding, discovered she'd been fined over $1,000 for a non-existent fence height violation. Another family, the Palermos, had been told their outdoor lighting violated neighborhood ambience and were forced to replace it at their own expense. That complaint had been filed and approved by Darlene alone. The panel reversed both decisions. I wasn't part of the new board, but that didn't mean I was done. There were still unanswered questions, chief among them. Why were Darlene and her crew so desperate to get into my backyard? The deck was legal. The garden was ordinary. But something had spooked them enough to risk trespassing and cutting a lock in broad daylight. I started digging. I requested copies of all recorded HOA meeting minutes for the past year. The previous board had been lazy about keeping consistent records, but I found something odd buried in a transcript from 6 months earlier. It was a passing mention during a meeting about possible easement encroachments on the north side of the neighborhood. My lot was one of the northernmost. The phrase was vague, easy to overlook, but it didn't match anything in the community's official plat maps. I pulled up the county records to cross-check any easements near my property. Nothing new was filed. No city easements, no utility expansions. But then I found it tucked into an old zoning proposal from 2 years ago. The HOA had submitted a request to the county to install a private trail behind several homes, including mine. The proposal had been quietly rejected due to lack of community input. The kicker: the trail would have run right through my backyard shed. It suddenly made sense. They weren't looking for code violations. They were looking for leverage. If they could find anything to label my deck or shed as unauthorized, they could push for corrective measures. And once that happened, they'd have an excuse to claim part of my yard as common area. They'd tried it before with another homeowner, but she'd moved before the issue was resolved. I printed the records and contacted Officer Martinez again. She met me at the community center and I laid it out. The rejected trail proposal, the old meeting notes, and the footage of them snooping around the shed, not the deck. She took her time reading through it. They were looking for justification to reclaim land, she said, her tone sharp. That's not just trespassing. If they'd filed a claim using falsified data or tried to enforce a non-existent easement, that could be attempted fraud. I leaned back. Can we prove intent, Possibly, she said. If we can show they knowingly acted on a rejected proposal and tried to manufacture violations to support it, that's a problem. 2 days later, the city attorney's office opened a formal investigation into the former board's actions. They subpoenaed HOA emails, which revealed even more. Darlene had been communicating directly with a private developer, someone looking to buy up small parcels to build a boutique walking corridor. And she'd promised to deliver access through the northern edge of the neighborhood my yard included. The emails showed her frustration when I built the deck. She wrote, "We'll find something to use. He didn't attend the landscaping vote, he's not a team player." Another message, "We may need to inspect discreetly, I'll handle it personally." That was enough. The city pressed formal charges against Darlene for attempted fraud, criminal trespass, and conspiracy to misuse HOA authority for personal gain. Bob and Cynthia were named as co-conspirators, though their roles appeared more passive. The developer, once contacted, claimed to have been misled into thinking the HOA had already secured access. He cut ties immediately and provided his own correspondence, which backed up the city's case. When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. Local outlets picked it up. "Neighborhood HOA President Charged in Property Scheme" was the headline on the front page of the County Gazette. The article included screenshots of the emails and a still frame from the footage I'd submitted showing Darlene stepping over my fence. Neighbors who'd once been indifferent were suddenly galvanized. A community group formed to push for permanent oversight reforms. They called themselves the North End Collective and held their first meeting in my driveway, folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. It wasn't about revenge, it was about rebuilding. At the same time, the City Council began drafting a new ordinance to limit HOA enforcement power when it came to private property access. The proposed law would require third-party mediation before any HOA action involving property lines or easements could be attempted. And it all stemmed from my case. The trials were set for early spring. Darlene hired a lawyer and tried to claim she was acting in the community's best interest. But the emails painted a different picture. She tried to leverage her position for personal influence and gain, and now she was cornered. At the preliminary hearing, the judge denied her motion to dismiss. He read portions of the emails aloud in court, emphasizing her intent to circumvent due process. Bob's attorney quietly entered a plea deal for reduced charges, and Cynthia followed suit. Darlene didn't. She still believed she could talk her way out. Back home, the community began to change. People started talking more. Fences got repaired with help from neighbors. The new board sent out a survey asking what the residents actually wanted to prioritize. And for the first time in years, the HOA newsletter didn't include a single fine notice. I focused on repairing my garden. I replaced the broken solar light and replanted the basil, this time with a small wooden sign that read "Private Roots." A quiet nod to the fight that had started it all. One afternoon, as I was watering the tomatoes, Officer Martinez stopped by again. She handed me a copy of the final charges filed against Darlene. 4 in total: criminal trespass, property destruction, attempted fraud, and abuse of authority under local governance law. "She's going to trial," Martinez said. "And this time the community's watching." I thanked her and offered her a tomato still warm from the sun. She laughed and took one. "They're good," she said. "Maybe run for something after this." "Not a chance," I said. "I like my battles small and winnable." She nodded, then added, "Well, you just changed your whole neighborhood. That's not small." She left and I stood there, hose in hand, watching the sunlight stretch across the lawn. A few kids rode past on bikes and one of them waved. I returned it with a nod. The board had tried to use fear, confusion, and silence. They thought a few clipped notices and empty threats could wear people down, but all it took was one well-placed camera, some patience, and a folder full of facts to bring the whole rotten structure down. And now, the roots were growing again, this time in the right direction. The trial began on a damp Thursday in April, inside the crisp, echoing walls of the county courthouse. I sat on the left side of the gallery, watching Darlene enter with her lawyer, a tall man in a pressed gray suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Darlene wore a navy dress and carried herself like she was attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony, not facing multiple felony charges. She didn't glance my way. The courtroom filled slowly neighbors, city officials, a local journalist scribbling into a narrow notebook. The judge, a woman with a no-nonsense tone and a reputation for zero tolerance toward corrupt local governance, entered and called the room to order. The prosecution opened with a detailed timeline. They laid out the unauthorized entry, the property damage, the failed attempts to fabricate violations, and most damning of all, the buried communications with the private developer, which they now presented on screen. The judge paused the proceedings and asked for clarification. "You're telling me," she said, tapping the paper lightly, "that the president of a neighborhood association promised land she didn't own to a private party and then took action to remove the legal owner's objections?" The lawyer hesitated. "There were misunderstandings." "No," she interrupted. "There was deception. When I was called to testify, I kept it simple. I confirmed the footage's authenticity, described the damage, and identified the board members in the video. Then I answered questions about the shed, the deck, the permits, and the timeline. I didn't need to add drama. The facts were enough. When the prosecutor asked if I had ever been informed about a proposed trail or asked to participate in any vote regarding it, I told the truth. No one ever mentioned it to me. I wasn't invited to a single meeting about it. From what I can tell, the board didn't want the community involved because they knew residents wouldn't approve." From across the room, I heard someone exhale sharply. I didn't turn to see who. Darlene testified last. Her voice was steady, but her words were scattered. She tried to paint the board's actions as proactive stewardship, claiming they had to enforce standards that benefited everyone. When confronted with her own emails, she said they were taken out of context. But when pressed about cutting through a private lock and entering without any official notice, she faltered. "I thought we had implied permission," she said. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Implied by whom?" There was no answer. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When the verdict came, the room was breathless, guilty, all counts. Darlene was convicted of criminal trespass, property destruction, abuse of authority, and attempted fraud. The judge ordered restitution, community service, and a 5-year ban from holding any leadership position in any civic or neighborhood organization. Bob and Cynthia, having already entered guilty pleas, received lesser penalties but were ordered to sit for depositions in the civil suit that followed, because this wasn't just about criminal charges anymore. A group of residents, including myself, had filed a class action lawsuit against the former board for abuse of power and financial mismanagement. That lawsuit uncovered even more: unauthorized use of HOA funds for personal dinners, donations to a political campaign none of us knew about, and backdoor payments to a landscaping company owned by Darlene's cousin. The HOA's insurance company settled with us out of court. Every homeowner received a refund for the unjustified fines paid under the previous board. The new board, elected during the oversight period, established a public financial portal for transparency. All future enforcement actions required 2/3 approval from the full board and documentation submitted to the city. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I didn't need to. I'd already won where it mattered. Back in the neighborhood, you could feel the shift. The weekly newsletter was no longer a threat-laden pamphlet. It became a bulletin of community events, repair updates, and volunteer opportunities. People who used to avoid eye contact at the mailbox now chatted across driveways. Kids started organizing bike races down the hill near the cul-de-sac. Someone planted sunflowers at the entrance sign. One evening in May, I got a knock at my door. It was Mr. Haverson holding a small box. "Some of us pitched in," he said. We figured you deserved it. Inside was a custom-made plaque for standing up when it counted from your neighbors. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just nodded. Thanks. We all weren't expecting a lot of things, he said. But you reminded us the rules are supposed to protect people, not control them. As he walked off, I glanced toward the backyard. The shed had a new coat of paint. The deck was freshly sealed. And the gate had a new reinforced lock, not because I was afraid, but because I'd earned the right to keep what was mine, without fear of someone barging in under the guise of authority. Over the next few weeks, I got back to my routine. Long shifts, quiet evenings, the occasional project. One Saturday, I set up a projector in the backyard, invited a few neighbors over, and showed an old Western on a makeshift screen. Someone brought popcorn. Someone else brought folding chairs. No one brought a clipboard. The HOA still existed, but it had changed. It was no longer something to dread. It was what it was always supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together. As the credits rolled that night, I leaned back in my lawn chair, listening to the quiet hum of night insects and the soft laughter of people who no longer had to look over their shoulders just to enjoy their own homes. We didn't just win a case. We reclaimed our homes, our voices, and our peace, and that's worth more than any deck permit or garden violation ever could be.